What is the idea of atomic awareness?
We all have and believe in the idea of habits. Habits are super important, whether they're big habits like being a healthy person or being proactive in terms of like let's say the 7 habits, or whether they're micro habits like in atomic habits where
Mm,
we're dealing with like small steps. And what I did was reflect a lot on the idea of mindfulness and this whole yogic and breathwork world that that I'm interested in, and the idea of habits and making a better life. And I thought the ultimate habit is awareness. And that is the ultimate atomic habit. Because when you're aware, you're most fully aligned with who you are. And if you're
mm.
fully aligned with who you are, then the decisions that you make, the things that you do, will all be towards that one vision that you have for yourself.
Yeah, 100%. I align so much with what you're saying right now. And it's so difficult, especially from a place of unalignment, to have clarity on the important decisions in life.
And we're all reflecting on that, especially like, with the changes in the world, the political situation, all the craziness. So it's really important that we like think about who we are and who we want to be, and then,
Yeah.
work at that point.
Book seems to me to be a very like personal pursuit. Like, yes, you write it because you hope that people find value in the teachings that you give in the book. Yes, but it's also something deeply personal. Why does it
Mm.
matter so much to you as the author? How would you answer that question?
For a long time, I've been teaching in different levels, if you want to call it that, whether it's teaching yoga teachers or teaching in businesses about innovation and creativity and in breath work and mindfulness and all these kind of areas. And I thought, isn't it seems like it's important, or people have been asking me, well, what's your, thought behind all this? And I really started to reflect. And when I came up with the atomic awareness idea, I was like, yeah, this says pretty much most of the things that I really want to say in terms of specifically the idea of how we craft our life in the best way.
Mm.
Because all the tools in the world aren't going to help us if we don't really listen to what we actually want.
I think, at least for me, it was super difficult because it's kind of trapped under layers of what other people want, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah,
And
yeah.
you have this beautiful story of Rumi and Shams. Maybe you can tell that because I think it illustrates the point really well.
Rumi, for those people who don't know, is a Persian poet, and he was written around 750 years ago. And he was the kind of person who was like a leader in his community. So he was already, if you want to call it like more than a religious leader, because at that time it wasn't like pure like religion and state. There was like, he's like a wise man of
Yeah,
his town and everything. And he had followers, he had teachers. I mean, he had students, disciples, if you want to call them that. He was
yeah.
like, and he had a big family as well.
Mm,
So he had everything taken care of. He was like one of those people who's like a statesman, like
mm,
an elder statesman, not, although he wasn't that old at that time. And and then coming through was this wandering teacher, a dervish, a Sufi, a person who was just like living close to the essence of what a person could do. His name was Shams of Tabriz. And he met Rumi one time, and when he met Rumi, it was like an explosion of light, right? For Rumi, he was like, "What?" In fact, the first encounter, it's of course, it's not 100% maybe historically accurate, was that Rumi was teaching, and Shams was walking by, and he's like, "Well, what do you know about it?" And Rumi said, "Well, I know all this stuff," and he's like,
mm,
"Yeah, yeah, prove it." And he took one of Rumi's books and he threw it into this fountain, and all of this, the students that were around him and everything got like really upset. And he said, what are you doing to my books? And he said, what are you doing, to these books? So he pulls it out, and when he pulls the book out, it's completely dry, right? It's not destroyed. And this was this beginning of their, relationship. Of course, there are other stories about how they met and the things that they did, but ultimately, um, when they started to really ignite one another, Shams basically moved into Rumi's house and almost took over and alienated the family. And it was like a real switch for Rumi. Um, Shams died mysteriously. They even questioned whether he was like killed by some of the followers. But by that time that he left, Rumi was transformed. He was a man of letters before. He was a man of
mm.
distinction, and then he became a poet of the heart. And most of the people who know Rumi now know of some of the 5,000 poems that he wrote. And of course, there were other great Persian poets at that time, but he was one that connected so much with the human heart. And that's what kind of made him accessible to the wider world as well, I think.
Is it fair to say that the character of Rumi represents order, represents in a lot of ways what society kind of dictates as this is what success looks like formal power, following, things like that. And incomes chaos in one way, but also aliveness.
100%. It was like he had everything in order. His life, for the lack of a better word, was like perfect. You know, if you looked
Yeah.
at him from the outside, you'd be like, he's one of the most respected person in his community. He was rich. He had a nice family. He had people that relied on him. And then there was something that was still missing. And when
Mm.
he found it, it was like chaos and, tumultuous time. But then it led him to really be a poet of the heart.
In the modern equivalent, I do feel that that's part of so many people's struggle, right? I have all of these things that society has told me I should go after, yet somehow I deeply know within myself that this can't really be it, right?
Yeah. A lot of people, they make like they visit these areas. So like when you go to a retreat or you go to
Mm,
Burning Man, something like that, you're entering into this tumultuous spiritual, psycho-spiritual
mm,
dimension. But then often we retreat back to our regular lives. So we get a little bit of a small picture into this.
mm,
But to integrate that is a whole different thing because it doesn't mean that you're going off and giving away your life and becoming something completely other. It's that in the moments that you're actually living, you're embracing that side of yourself as well. So it's not like one or the other. It's not like going on vacation and then coming back and working intensely. It's like having this intense fire for life,
mm.
dancing for life.
The things that pop up in my head now is that so me and my wife, we've just made a huge life move. We live in a different country, a different city. And one of the things that we've noticed in our own path is that we've been on this very clear kind of hedonic treadmill, but also a kind of a scarcity slash builder treadmill, like always
Mhm,
investing for the next episode, always like whenever we get to the next step, that's when we're supposed to be happy or whatever. But that never ends up coming, that feeling of truly alive and content in the kind of ferocity of that moment, right? Like it's visceral in the strength of here and now is where we live, not in 2 years from now.
mhm,
And we're trying to remind ourselves of, okay, for this next chapter that we're building now, a
mhm,
huge element of what we want to achieve there is really the feeling of that life is now. We're
mhm,
not saving life for a later step, right?
mhm,
Obviously, this concept comes from we've both been to a lot of retreats. Me and Hannah, we've done a lot of self development work. So like probably the essence of the idea of why we want this comes from somewhere, right? But really
mhm,
trying to integrate it into the day to day is at times it feels like such a wonderful luxury to even be able to think about, but at times it does feel daunting as well. I don't know,
mhm.
because we're so habituated into always saving up for whatever the next step is, you know?
Mm. When I heard, from you, because 'cause we've known each other a bit through the years, and, I was so happy because it felt like you were doing exactly this type of journey,
Mm.
but integrating it in there's a good word in Swedish, a sunt way, like with
Yeah.
responsibility, right? You
Yeah.
have kids and all that stuff. So you 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 wanted a different life. You didn't wait forever. You put things in place to make it happen. And at the same time, you made huge changes that
Mm.
were better for your everyday life, right? That's the thing. I mean, we need a everyday life that's full of, joy and
Yeah.
spending time with our kids if we have kids or
Mm.
just dancing or going to the mountains or
Mm.
whatever it might. And if we don't do those things, like you said, now, when?
Either you could say that it's accessible to really anyone. It's more about you have to think about the ecosystem that supports that vision, and it is at times it can feel like a complex puzzle with, especially for us, it's like I have a new company, a new location, doing all the business more or less remotely, and we need to finance that, and there's new schools, and there's a long list of things that needs to come in place. On the other hand, it's like dead simple too. Like
Mm.
it's more like take the decision as a unit and then just tackle the next thing. So once we actually took the decision, I think that was, at least for me, I don't think it's the same for Hannah, my wife. But for me, the bigger conquest was the decision of doing it. That was the
Mm.
harder journey for me. I
Mhm.
think I lived a really good life, and
Yeah.
there's so much security in that. And you can be a security junkie, and I have been a security junkie for sure for a long time. And being able to say, and it's been my wife's frustration. She's been the one that says, "But this can't be it."
Yeah.
And initially, I remember this was super threatening to me because I interpreted it as, it's my fault that it's not more. But once I understood it and once I integrated, especially, I did a lot of like shadow work over the summer, dealing with a
Mm.
lot of like the core fears and
Mm.
getting them out in the light. And once that was, I don't think that's ever going to be done, but at least done to a certain extent. Once that was done, it was more lightness around, yes, this is what we want to do and we want to do it together.
Once you make a decision, sometimes the things fall into place, and it's
Yeah,
when we don't really make a full-on decision, when we hedge our bets or when we have the plan B.
100%.
It's so strange. Someone asked me the other day only, a friend of mine, she's like, "Oh, do you still wanna do, like, things that I used to do?" I used to make
Mm,
films for companies and stuff like that, and I was like, "I've decided that I just have to say no.
mm.
I'm gonna do Atomic Awareness, and I'm gonna do my novels or my screenplays or scripts or whatever, and I'm not gonna go back. That's it. It's gone, you know?
Mm,
Um, and in that is a real strength,
mm.
and whatever works out, it works out somehow, right? Whatever it is. But in the decision is the thing.
Yeah, and there's wisdom in understanding that sometimes things need to die.
Yeah.
Some of the things, like, they've served you really well for like 20 years, right? And
Mm,
you're emotionally attached to them as something that was your career or was your source of whatever power, fame, influence. And now they're not serving me anymore. And I think there's something beautiful into, because we talk a lot about like failing in like entrepreneur culture, and I think that's really interesting. But like, there's a difference between like failing and quitting, and like quitting from a place of that chapter has now passed. It's time for me to venture into the new purpose.
yeah, yeah. Like I have teenage boys, and remember there are certain, and I talk to them about certain moments even now
Mm,
that they go through because they're trying to figure out what they're going to do for a while. I'm
mm,
like, you got lots of options, but some options are closed. Like they loved football, right? For instance, and at a certain point, if you're not there, then in terms of career, then that's it.
yeah,
If you're 18 already and you're not in the pro
yeah,
league, you're gone.
yeah,
The guys are already there. And so there's a point where it's physically things cut off.
mm.
But when that happens to professionally or in our emotional world, we tend to hold on things for a lot
Yeah, because
longer.
there's no such clear point, right? I
Yeah.
remember that as well, that point when that came into my life, when I used to watch the Olympics and I could almost say, if I tried hard enough, that could be me. And then all of a sudden, when I was like 25, no, that can't be me. It's pretty clear. But in but in the kind of area of, I don't know, knowledge work, or the get a bigger house, those kind of areas, they're so open ended. You can chase those ghosts all the way through, right?
Yeah. And so it's finding like, also, like, identifying how we feel. I think often we skip over how we really feel, and
Mm,
sometimes to go there, we need, yeah, a bit of silence or, tools for that, like meditation or something, to really listen to, like, "Oh, actually, how do I feel?" There are people who are purely execution oriented,
mm.
um, and whether they're happy or not is another question, but they can get a lot of things done. That's one thing to do. But then to actually make a life that you feel is integrated and supporting you and that you can, where you're dancing through life.
Mm.
That doesn't mean that we don't do the hard things, but that when we do things, we do them in the right direction, right?
Yeah, how
'Cause
much
that's
of this is a question of like, you really feel in your bones that this mission is my purpose? How much of it
mm,
is that versus other things?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that's where the fear things come in. Like, so for instance, making a certain amount of money or having a certain title, and you think, oh, I want to. I've met a lot of people who like wanted to be the CEO,
Yeah,
and they work and work and they get to be the CEO, and they're like, this is terrible.
yeah,
I don't want to be.
miserable.
My aspirations, because I'm basically a creative, like a creative, right? And I've been a professional creative in the past. I'm not. I wasn't thinking, oh, CEO.
Mm,
Mostly men, but some women who become CEOs. They're like, this is just a giant job now, rather
yeah.
than all the other thing. All the other things come with it, pay and all that stuff. But sometimes it's not exactly what you think.
Mm.
It's interesting, right?
Through all the years of you working in kind of the yogic traditions and so forth, what are the things, specifically successful people, like the lies that they tell themselves, and what are the things that they've taught themselves to ignore in terms of signs of this might not be actually that aligned towards what's truly me?
It's a good question. I feel like there's a longing, and there's also a space there, especially, you know, uh, with men that have worked themselves into kind of corporate world. There can be a longing for a deeper connection to themselves and to other people. It can be lonely to be feeling like you're driven, and maybe you have like a men's group that do things or activities, but maybe you're kind of missing this, yeah, deeper connection. And as soon as you open up to it and meet men that are doing this, there is like a feeling like of, oh, I belong here in this.
Yeah.
So I think that that's one of those things. There's a kind of a, like, it's cut off in a way. Um, I think women in general maybe have been more open to these kinds of activities, um, but that doesn't mean that's, yeah, yeah. But also keeping them separate. They don't want to, like, integrate the two sides or multiple sides into their everyday life in a way, or feel like it wouldn't be accepted.
We like to keep domains separate,
Mm.
and I personally think that's you're not schizophrenic in a sense. Like, why would you treat your retreat self separate from your leadership self in a sense?
We could go into the yoga thing a little bit here, because this is a kind of thing. Because when I'm teaching yoga philosophy to people who want to become yoga teachers, we have to go through things like the chakras. Now, if I'm talking to, let's say, the typical business person, my brother or somebody else who isn't interested in this at all, if I start going on to the chakras, and then there are these colors, and then each of the animals that represent all this kind of stuff, um, they're like, "Yeah, this is just like
Mm,
too weird and too." And I think one of the problems with people who are totally into, let's say, this pseudo spiritual world,
yeah.
that they're missing the point. There are no colors, there's no animal, there's no like symbol. All those things are uh, ways to help us understand our own psychology and our own physiology and our own, let's say, spiritual state better. And once we separate, but they're also really good metaphors. So,
Mm,
idea is to say, okay, if this isn't a color, that's necessarily associated with this chakra, and the way I use it is that the base chakra, at the Muladhara chakra, is red, right? And you go, red, orange, blue, and then you get to the heart. Now, if you already used red, you can't use the heart color, which
mm,
everyone else thinks is red, right? So then they say, oh, it's green or maybe pink, because it's like red, and it's like, it's just because they already used the red,
mm,
like, so the question is, when you're working with yourself and using this style of metaphor, what can it help you to understand about yourself? All the other stuff around it is made up.
yeah.
It's a story that maybe helps us to understand ourselves, and maybe that story doesn't appeal to us. Maybe, the hero's journey appeals to us
Mm.
more. Yeah. It doesn't matter what the story is that we use, as long as we get to these areas. And that's what we all need, I think, and most of us are longing for.
I agree, and there's something I don't know. My journey is really from one who's been 100% logical. and quite prideful in that, horoscopes are mumbo jumbo or whatever. Honestly, horoscopes is one of the few things that I still struggle with. My wife is super spiritual, and that still gets me, but um, I think it's almost impossible to understand some of these concepts unless you have some very, very present and kind of powerful, at least taste of some area of it. And then it's like, at least for me, like the first time I 100% through, I think it was extended breath work and meditation that was almost like 3-4 hours long, just one thing. And by the end of it, I was 100% convinced, and I still am to this day, that I saw my grandparents in the room and they were with me. And it was so beautiful and so light and it was so powerful. Um, and that was like my first like real taste of it. And then everything kind of, no, I wouldn't say everything, but a lot of things that like I know with my logic brain that they were probably not there, right?
Mhm.
But the experience of it was there, and the value and the calmness was there. What else then that I've said that that's just mumbo jumbo could I get value out of? It doesn't at all mean that I need to go on a mission to tell you that you need to believe the same things. The only thing that matters is that I found a lot of value out of that.
Mhm.
Calmness, reflection, a sense of belonging in a way that I hadn't done in like I can't remember that I ever did, you know?
Yeah, I think most people who have, let's say, experiences, they're transformative because there's a reality to them that is beyond what we would normally accept. And yet
Yeah.
we know they're undeniable because it's a subjective reality.
Mm,
This is a good point, I think, to point out, we experience the world through and interact to the world through our senses.
mm,
Biologically, we know that there's a limitation on our senses, right? We only see a certain wavelengths. We only hear a certain amount of levels. So a dog, for instance, very clearly hears better, smells better, right? Um, we see in a certain number of colors. Some animals don't see in color at all,
mm.
right? It's black and white and, value based. Bats are using sonic ways,
Yeah.
right? If you think of a fly's eye, how looking through that eye must
Mm.
be, what they perceive in the world. So our perception of the world is limited by the tools that we have to sense the world.
Yes.
Knowing that means that we're missing one whole hell of a lot.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've actually never heard that before.
We know our perception is limited to this, then when we have extra perceptions because of, let's say, an intense practice like breath work, or we remember our dream, or we do some psychedelics, or we have a traumatic experience and things
Mm,
hit us, we have a hallucination or whatever. All those things are also true as what we think this conversation is, um, because they're subjective levels of experience that we have.
yeah.
And everything that we have is separate. Everything that we have is based on those perceptions and everything we believe about the world or
Mm.
experience the world.
If you've been listening to this podcast for some time, you know what I think about AI. I'm deeply excited about it, but I also see companies struggle with it. And you know that I think it's not primarily due to technical reasons. Compared to previous revolutions, let's call it the internet wave, part of why we struggled initially was that, well, the infrastructure wasn't built out. We didn't have online credit card payments and whatnot. But the difference with AI is that the infrastructure is already here. The technology is so much more capable than we actually use it right now. And the problem for most C-suites that I talk to, CEOs and senior managers, is that they know about the importance of AI, but they can't seem to get to that position where they truly understand how is AI making me fundamentally more competitive. I understand that it can save costs, hours here and there, increase some productivity number, but how do I distinguish myself on my market? Like the ones that truly survived the digitalization era wasn't a bookstore that got a website. It was the Amazons of the world. So where you truly find the transformation of what we do today and how can we unlock things, serve customers that we never could, do innovations that weren't ever before practical, that type of innovation. The primary problem that I see, in all honesty, is that the C-suite, you don't really understand the technology. And not understanding the technology for the sake of understanding the technology, but for the sake of having a strategic discussion. So that's why I started Grail. I stand right smack dab in the middle of, I understand the technology, I understand strategy and execution. And bringing these two together is what we do at Grail. So if you understand that this is something that needs to happen, then we should talk. Thing is, slots for this spring is already filling up. Grail has been in the works for some time, so I've already have engagement for the spring. But what I'm looking for is that one CEO in each market that truly wants to make a dent in the universe. So if you're that guy or that girl, please head over to Grail.works and let's talk. Say that you haven't had this experience at all.
Mm.
You could argue, well, why should I aim for it? If that makes sense. Like, what's the value of it?
This is a good question. I think that there's only value if we feel that the life that we're living isn't the one that we want to live.
Mm,
So, obviously we all have our, people that we rely on, right? And or we go back to and have relationships with. And I think of my brother. He's not interested in this kind of stuff at all.
mm,
And yet, if I talked to him about it, he wouldn't be negative. He'd be like, "Oh yeah, whatever. You're just like weird." And yet, he's managed to make a really nice life with a long-term wife and kids. He
mm.
loves his kids. All those kind of things are in place. So if you ask him, he doesn't feel in any way discontent,
Yeah.
about things. That's fine.
Mm,
Like, so I think that that's the thing, like we're all searching for this level of life that we feel is beautiful. And if we're not living that life, then almost have our own selves maybe to blame, if that's not the right word, but our own responsibility to go for that thing.
yeah, absolutely. And,
Yeah.
and life has seasons and chapters as well, right? You could be completely content in the version of you that was in your 30s, and now you're in your 40s, and you realize that the version that was satisfactory to you then might not be now anymore for 100 different reasons. Your kids are older, or you've had some experience, or whatever. I remember
Mhm.
reading David Deida's book, The Way of a Superior Man, and he was talking about mission and purpose and direction in life. And one of the things that was really, like, it was a very simple frame, but kind of clicked for me. It was, he was discussing, how do you know that because he sees purpose in, like, you have multiple purposes, and they teach you something, and then once you've finished with that mission, it's time to get on to the next purpose. But how do you know when it's time? And he said that usually what happens, especially to men, is that things that felt very important, that meeting or whatever it is to you before, suddenly seems trivial and unimportant. The same thing.
Mm,
And I
mm,
started watching for those patterns in my own life. Like,
mm,
does this still feel important? And
mm.
for me, some of the things that I was spending a lot of time on didn't feel important. And
Yeah,
it's so simple. It's so simple.
yeah.
And the only realization for me was, okay, this purpose has served this too. Time
Mm.
to figure out what the next purpose is. And then obviously that's a big question. How do you figure that out? But perhaps another podcast. I don't know.
I've read his book, so I know that, and I think that there's how we navigate life is one thing, and how we navigate ourselves is another thing.
Interesting.
And
Elaborate.
this self that we are traveling with, it's changing, but it's still there, right? So
Mm,
you're not the same self that you were. But if I asked you, about your past, it's you that's like looking out through the eyes of that time.
mm,
And that you is not necessarily unchanging because you can grow psychologically and you can grow, maybe spiritually, but ultimately there's a you that's behind all this. I think sometimes we feel like the measures are changing, and they should change through the seasons of our life in a sense, because we're physically changing, you know.
Mm.
And yet, that essence and connection to that essence is like a much simpler thing. And I think that um, it's really, if we really start to listen into that as much as possible and like take away all of the ideas of success and measurements of how our life might be and all that, and get down to the essence, the questions become a lot simpler at every stage.
Yeah, and it's super difficult for somebody who lives up in their brain. I can attest. This is one of the concepts that I still struggle a lot with. There is so much wisdom in your own body if you connect to it. And I think coming back to your book and awareness, maybe we can spend some time on talking about what are the practices in
Mm,
very practical term that you'd say that these are for people getting into this for the first time, because we're not trying to convert the already converted here really.
yeah.
What would that be?
The number one and simplest practice is very simple, short meditations.
Mm,
And you know, there are plenty online. You know, I have some on my website. They're, you know, they're everywhere. You know, and the reason that they're good is because what we're just learning to do is to still the mind, or to let the mind be whatever it needs to be. This mind that's moving all the time.
mm,
There's an openness for feeling how
mm,
we feel. Now, a lot of times there's a resistance right away. It's like, I
mhm,
can't sit still, or I can't think of this or whatever. And that's the practice. Maybe it's 3 to 5 minutes, you know.
mm,
I think one of the reasons why in the, I guess, 60s and 70s, that transcendental meditation was so powerful is that it was devised to work for the everyman.
mm,
It's 2 times a day, 20 minutes a day, and then you're given like a secret code word, a mantra, right, which is just some word that you repeat, and then you just let that come in, and that can take over your mind.
mm.
And you're just maybe breathing and concentrating on the in and out breath, right? So those things, eventually, if you meditate often, then those things disappear as well, and you just enter into the state where
The
you're breathing.
drifting thoughts, is that what disappears you mean, or?
Yeah, it will help disperse the drifting thoughts if you have something to concentrate on.
Mm,
Um, So that type of practice is excellent. I think that's the number one thing. It's also can help us when we're in a reactive state, and this is because if we have some practice in place and we know that, oh, I feel more calm now, then we can shift into that. So, for instance, you're pissed off,
mm,
you just had a shitty phone call or whatever, and then you know your partner comes in and or your kids come in, and you're already like angry or
mm.
frustrated or whatever from some external influence. Now that we always talk about this, you know, whenever you get into things like the stimulus and the response, it's our responsibility how we respond. We know
Yeah.
this. So if we have a practice of meditation, then at that moment when we really feel that thing, we automatically, instead of lashing out or whatever, we automatically go into just that big breath in, the
Yeah.
sigh out, helps us to recalibrate the nervous system. And if anyone was watching and they just tried that, you feel right away. If you take a big breath in and then just like, I mean, I can feel the tingling in my skin.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
That's changing our biochemistry. It's changing the connection to our nervous system, and it gives us a sense of softness. So just maybe if we did 3 of those, that switch from the sympathetic to the parasympathetic nervous system is something that is biological. So it's a very physical, clear way to recenter us
Mm,
physiologically and mentally. So
yeah.
that's the number one thing. If you're doing that, then I think that's a great number one step. Then there are all kinds of things about listening to yourself and everything like that, more journaling type things, you know,
Mm.
that come later. That's the number one first step for anyone.
I was on a retreat here a couple of months ago, and I had a friend on the retreat, and he was talking about that sometimes it's a little bit like potty training. So he had a toddler at that point, and he was like, the first thing that they learn is I'm wet from having peed myself. So actually recognizing the feeling of wet pants. The
Mm.
second one is understanding I am now peeing, like that sensation, and connecting that sensation to the coming wet pants or whatever. And
Mm.
then finally having, okay, I'm about to pee. So that's kind of the progression of that one. Um, and a lot of times, especially when you're like really in that aroused state, and we laughed about it because, like, obviously for me, it could be in a conflict with my partner, for example, taking a little bit of the edge off and just stating to myself when I'm reacting from that agitated state, like, oh, I am now peeing. This is what's happening. That's the extent of it. So next time I'll try to catch myself before this happens, but it's not more than that. And I have the tools to kind of recenter myself now after having done this work for quite some time.
Yeah, well, we're always training. This is one of the things about, this work is that it's never done. I mean, maybe, there are some, beings who are completely, I don't know. People talk about, like, the Dalai Lama or whatever,
Yeah.
right? And I'm like, yeah, the Dalai Lama, he seems, like, very beautiful. I haven't met him, right?
Mm,
All that stuff, and I'm sure he is, like, enlightened and all that,
mm,
but he doesn't have kids,
mm.
you know?
He doesn't know the struggle of waking up every night for 6 years straight.
Yeah, right? He doesn't have that feeling like, "I have responsibility for this person." He might say,
Mm,
"Oh, yes, I have responsibility for the whole Tibetan people," but it's not the same thing, right? So, if you haven't been through some real, like, stuff like that you
mm,
have a personal connection with, it's very hard, to feel like you're always aligned. So the best thing is to just keep getting back to it. This is an interesting thing I think about when people talk about manifestation. You talk about, like, moving and everything, right? We we have a vision and, we put things in order and then we fulfill that, and maybe we celebrate it, maybe we don't celebrate it, but we should probably celebrate it. But at that point when it's kind of, let's say, in place,
mm,
uh, then it's almost as if we forgot the conditions that it took for us to get there. And those conditions most had to do with aligning,
mm.
deciding, making a mood board or a vision
Yeah.
or a list wherever you work or whatever,
Mm,
and then executing on those things in general. Sometimes we lose sight of what got us to where we are, and then
mm,
but if we keep revisiting this, it's you don't have to do a lot of new stuff all the time.
mm.
Uh, it's fun, right? I mean, you want to try the next retreat or the next group or whatever, and yet the main thing and the simplest thing is to get back to that core self.
So I think the ability to observe thought is mega, right? It's the foundation of a lot of things. But how do you move from, because that's also a little bit of a passive behavior, is shutting out the noise in order for like that little violin in the rock concert that might be actually what you want to hear, but it's so drowned out by all of the other noise. How do you move
Mm.
from just quietening down in order to hear that into something that feels more active when it comes to alignment and living more towards your purpose, would you say?
If, for instance, we go into this meditation, it's not totally about like quieting that noise. It's about listening more carefully. Let's say that you're listening to a very sophisticated piece of music. Doesn't have to be like classical music. It could be anything. And you start listening and you hear, the theme, you hear the singer, right? You might hear the drums. And then if you really start to listen, you can follow the bass line. Boom, 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 right? You start hearing,
Mm,
you really hear and you can tune yourself into that. And you could almost selectively choose to listen to that bass line if you really start to
yeah.
listen, right? Any of us who like music, we've done things like this. We've started
Mm,
to listen, like, oh,
yeah.
and then maybe we can start to listen to the chord, the piano part or whatever. And that kind of listening is like part of the whole process.
Mm,
Most of the time, the chatter isn't our actual thoughts. It's weird. In fact, there's very little thinking in this voice. It's mostly like the complaining voice that is the
mm,
loudest.
yeah.
And when we get through that, then we start to hear the next level of voice, which might be, I choose not to be this kind of thing. I want to think about solutions. Then the other thing
Mm,
comes, right? And then even deeper than that, it's actually, I'm so freaking lucky. I have this wonderful life, you know, I can't believe that. And then this comes in with, oh, we have to do this, a planning side, and then it's like, there's gonna be all these problems,
Yeah.
right? So then we start going deeper and deeper. And ultimately, if we keep going deeper, we will find a kind of a pure, spacious silence. And in that silence, that's where the real shifts happen. And at the
Mm.
same time, all these voices are happening within us simultaneously. It's just that we're not like listening
Mm.
through, like really honing in on them, I think.
I'm slightly switching subject, but it's what arose in me when you were talking. So I just switched up a lot in my life, and now I find myself as an entrepreneur. And we talked about again before we turned the cameras on that I really struggle with prioritization at this point because there's always stuff to do, and I'm quite capable in terms of doing stuff, right? And what I find without the distancing is that I just do stuff, but the stuff are like low impact. So the
Mhm.
ability, at least for me, to like the further down I go, the more clarity it becomes. So I
Mm,
need the distance. I need brain shut off from work mode. That's a huge factor in me being effective at work. Like these weeks has been a reminder of visit the mountains
mm,
and don't record stuff that you're going to do on your to-do list when you come home. Don't even bring the earphones or whatever it might be. You
mm.
need space in order to get clarity. That's been absolutely huge. I don't know how well it kind of connects to the layers of voice that you just spoke about, but there's something in for sure that in the chain of voices or in the tree of voices, like the unimportant stuff has a frustrating tendency to kind of elbow their way to the front of the queue.
Yeah. You made me think of the second thing that I was gonna say just a second
Awesome.
ago, and that is the flow state. And,
Mm,
it can come from an activity like running, but it could also come from something else that takes our concentration in a positive way. So,
mm,
for instance, I like to play the piano. Maybe it's coding. Maybe it's something that's totally related to exactly the thing that you're doing,
mm,
but that you spend a lot of time on the busy work, the admin, and
mm,
less time on the actual thing, which might be whatever,
mm,
creating something you need to do, whatever. I think that allowing ourselves and giving ourselves, especially with all the distractions, the friggin', you know, dopamine kicks that we
mm,
get from constant scrolling, to step away, to step into something that we can enter into a flow state is
mm.
another amazing way to go deeper.
I had a conversation actually up on a mountaintop here over the weekend with a friend, Philip. And we were talking about that sometimes it can be difficult to distinguish between what are actually distractions. And we were talking about video games as an example. It can feel in the short term calming because you're so engaged that you don't hear your thoughts. But it's really something quite different versus what we're talking about now. So I was gently pushing back because he was like, "Yeah, I feel really, really stressed, and I need like an outlet, and I want to get back into playing some video games and have time for that." And I was like, because I really identified like 10 years ago that used to be my coping mechanism as well. I had video games on and a video show running, so I was so like I had so much impressions that it was finally quiet. So I felt that it was relaxing to me. Um, but having experienced something else, I also feel like that's a numbing behavior, and I think there's a lot of those types of hobbies that you can kind of tell yourself that these are these moments of flow state, but you're in a little bit you're confusing it as well and tricking yourself perhaps, or is it or is this me being an meditation elitist up in the mountain?
All right. So, I think the video game thing is a good question. The reason is that when you're using the video game, you're
Mm,
definitely igniting, this dopamine, cortisol. Like you're zapping yourself constantly with the internal chemicals of
yeah.
basically war and fighting,
Mm,
right? Um, I was surprised. I'm not like a big video gamer, but I started to play a video game with my kids, right? And it was like a really simple one,
mm,
kid level, maybe they were like 10 or whatever. And what they would have these little it was like it's online, but it's a card thing, and you put a card down and then they go out and they fight each other, right? And I started to feel like at one point my pulse was like going
mm,
boom, boom, boom,
mm,
and I was angry
mm,
in in this little video game where I was probably playing with a 9-year-old in, like, some other country, and I was like, "This is not good." It is stealing my attention, I'm not thinking about other stuff, but it's also igniting parts of my, chemical system
mm,
that aren't healthy in
mm,
that sense, right? And or helping me in that sense, so it feels like we're focused, and we are focused, but we're also filling ourselves with our natural high of, dopamine and cortisol and all these kind of
yeah,
things. We're fighting.
yeah,
Um, so in the sense of blocking our mind out, maybe it's good. Maybe there's a camaraderie side to it that's good and all that kind of stuff. It
yeah,
could be. Um, I think that to enter into a flow state, usually, uh, there's like a feeling of not productivity isn't the right word, but meaning.
mm,
There's like meaning there, you know?
mm,
Uh, Now it could be playing a sport, it could be, painting or drawing or writing or playing the piano or whatever. Um, those are much simpler and they're not triggering so much of these kind of impressions chemicals.
yeah.
But I don't know. There's probably, studies on this that show the level of, stress hormones and things like that that are being created in these different environments.
I had a
So in
neuroscientist on who explained it to me as what we really, if we look at it like long term versus short term, what we really enjoy as the kind of felt experience is the rise of dopamine, the rise of it. Not
mm,
necessarily high levels of dopamine, a really short, intense burst of that feeling of contentment or purpose or something like that. But it's very, very short. So if you want to optimize for more of a day that feels purposeful, not just a moment that feels purposeful, I don't think anybody feels that it feels purposeful to scroll Instagram, but at least satisfactory in the short term. But what
mm,
if you want to optimize for like your whole day or your whole week to be like that? What you want to do is to optimize for a slow rise, a slow and steady rise of dopamine. And after having heard that, I think that to me was yes, what I want is the slowness of the rise. So it
mm,
impacts the way I shape my mornings, for example, tremendously. Like
mm.
I never start out with phones until we leave the kids at school. It
Yeah,
sounds pretentious, but it makes a huge difference.
yeah, yeah.
The simplest hack for us was having the charging station in the kitchen and having an old school clock because that eliminated my need to pick up the phone because I suck when I've actually picked up the phone, can't put it down. But I'm quite good at not picking it up if it's not in front of me, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
makes
yeah, yeah.
such a difference for the clarity I can bring to the day and the enjoyment of the day as a total.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's the key, to find, systems that work. Systems are a big thing in terms
Mm,
of obviously habit building, but also in terms of living our life in a positive way. We need some systems in place, that we're conscious of when we're not in in the mix, right?
yeah.
When we can clearly and we're going, "Okay, what can we do here? This is a good system. Let's go with this for a while." Then you can assess things, but making a system that feels like, "Yeah, this is good," you know?
Besides meditation, what are great systems do you feel?
One of the things is I think you named it, is turning off, as much as possible the stuff, from the outside,
Yeah.
whether it's, having a wind down. Everyone talks about wind downs. I don't personally know anyone except for people who are online saying that they have wind downs that has
Mm,
wind downs.
mm. What
But,
is a wind down for those people who haven't heard it before?
well, like, you'll turn off all your screens, you won't
Mm,
have any TV for 2 hours before you go to bed,
mm,
all that stuff. Maybe you change the lighting,
mm,
and then you walk around your house bored, right?
mm, mm.
It's probably a good thing, right? I don't do it, even though I know that it's good when I
Mm,
do it. When I do not turn on the TV and don't watch anything and
yeah.
just chat to my partner, or yeah, I don't get onto the Instagram thing and start
I would love
scrolling.
the kind of biological explanation why good systems has a tendency to feel like high cost emotion because we all I think we would all agree that when we're in the habit of training. You could almost never imagine yourself not training, or when you're in the habit of spending the last hour before bed just with your partner without a phone, and you're in that habit, you could like, how could we ever live another life like this? But
Yeah.
then you fall out. It's so easy to fall out of them, and it's when you're out of them, it's so incredibly difficult to get back into them. It feels almost threatening. And I would love to have some type of like, how did this serve us evolutionarily? Why this was the path that Darwin chose for us?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, people like Huberman talk about the neuroscience of these things, and
Mm,
there are, like I read Dopamine Nation, and I mean, there's a lot of very smart people sitting there thinking of ways to get you triggered.
mm,
And it doesn't take much because it's also an invisible thing. Like, let's say you're a drinker. Um, it's like if you say, "Oh, I'm not going to have a drink," it's very hard. It's almost like it speaks to you. And then you want to go over there and have like a glass of wine or whatever. And then all of a sudden you have like 5 glasses of wine. You're like,
mm,
oh.
yeah,
And this is similar thing with the dopamine kick. You have this thing and it just clicks. Once you get your phone, it's
yeah.
got you, right?
Yeah,
You
and
know,
it's sort of like that because you could have been really strong 14 times in terms of ignoring the notification, and then you got on the 15th time, and they still get you. They still win in a sense.
and it's an obvious thing with alcohol because the alcohol is a drug, right?
Mm,
You know that. Yeah,
yeah,
no matter what you do, it's a drug. But with the phone, you
mm,
don't really understand that it's a drug, that it's a thing that's happening inside. You don't see it squir,
yeah,
like,
yeah, and it's tricky too because you could start out by answering an email that you have to do for something productive, and then pivot from that into Instagram doom scrolling for 2 hours. So
yeah.
like it's not universally bad, or you can answer the call from your kid or whatever. So like the first action could actually be good, and then it's just that the follow up actions are not good for you. Mm,
If I go to the toilet,
mm,
I won't just go to the toilet, right? I
mm.
grab my phone and bring it in. I feel like I'm like a Neanderthal, like a monkey or something, like taking my little
Banana.
thing with yeah, taking my little thing with me all the time.
Yeah,
And at some point, I think we have to say, "Hey, wait a minute, you know, I have a choice.
yeah,
I don't have to carry this with me."
yeah.
You know? I
Yeah,
don't
but
even
you
wanna
also feel like a little bit stupid when you leave your phone out and you go take a dump, and it's like, what do I do now? And you start reading the old shampoo bottles that you did back in the 90s, you know? Feels so weird. Hey, I want
gosh.
to get back to the story of Shams and Rumi. So one of the things that's interesting to me with that story is that Shams comes in and is kind of the disruptor of Rumi. So a lot of times, at least to my felt experience, you could have people along the journey that kind of nudge you towards understanding that you probably need to do some work. You have patterns from your past that are not serving you in a good way. But ultimately, I felt very strongly that this was a journey that I had to do. So like, what's the responsibility question here, and can you be a shams to somebody else's Rumi, and is that a good thing to be, or like how do you see these different power roles playing out?
We're talking about, a different time and a different place.
Mm,
There was a system of, like, let's say, teacher and student.
mm,
Even in the Socratic time, there's a teacher and student. And then in India, there's this kind of guru thing, and right. So in some cultures and places, there are these characters that are
mm,
meant to be in a system in place that are meant to help us grow.
yeah,
To some degree, in the West, we used to have the church, and
yeah.
there was some of these religious leaders who would capture people and all this kind of stuff.
We used to have
I
rites of passages more clearly as well as a society. That's something that I've thought a lot about, like the rite of passage into being a man, or into being a father or something like that. That they're very like subdued in modern life.
that same type of relationship is often hard to, let's say, find.
Mm,
Um, those of us who are interested in opening up this side of things for whatever reason, maybe we
mm,
feel that was something missing, or maybe we just feel that this longing, um, then there are things in place like modern day guru type people who
yeah,
we can learn from, whether they're soft or hard,
mm,
like you got for the toxic masculinity with Andrew Tate and
mm,
people like that. It's very easy to fall into those things if you're a young teenager and going through this kind of thing. Yeah, like I'm gonna,
yeah,
but those kind of characters emerge.
mm,
So I think finding one where we actually feel good, and that's
mm,
a hard thing. So in a sense, atomic awareness is that kind of like step you could, work with this kind of material. There are
mm,
people who are in this type of stuff. Um, uh, some people are following like Sadhguru and all kinds of.
mm.
So there are these characters. Whether you meet one personally is another question. Yeah.
A really good explanation behind the kind of Andrew Tate type people. You have masses of young boys specifically who feel that society used to be for them and now it's not, or whatever they feel. But and then there's this one authoritative figure that has a simple solution to it. So in the self-help world, this must be a tension that has always existed. You've been in this world way more than I have been, and been a teacher in that world, if if you allow that expression.
Yeah.
Um, how do you recognize as a searcher that this teacher is probably somebody that I would benefit from following?
If you're feeling, let's say, vulnerable and you feel like you need something, I think it's easy to fall into this person has all the answers, kind of
This
thing.
one person kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a problem. Now, as an adult, let's say, fully functional man or woman, right? You have your own responsibility, and you have to start to question, uh, you know, uh, what it is that you need and want. There's a saying, I can't remember if it was the Buddha that said it, but if you see the Buddha on the road, kill him. In other words,
Yeah.
like, yeah, right. You're not meant to be ultimately a follower. These are the whole idea of guru. Guru, the word means the light bringer or the person that sheds light for you.
Mm,
So you see ahead a little bit.
mm.
They lighten the path. They're not meant to be the path.
Ah,
They're meant to just, like, put a light down so you see, "Oh, this is
mm,
where I have to go."
mm,
If you get too dependent on a person, I think that you can get lost. Now, there is in the yogic world, in the yogic tradition, a thing called bhakti, which is devotion. It's
mm,
very, very hard, for a Western person and certainly a Western male to feel this devotion for anyone else. It's probably not the easiest path, right? Because you're meant to just be like, but you do see in like modern day churches, and there are certain like actually people who like follow Trump to wherever, right? They just see
mm.
this guy, gonna Trump, whatever he says, right? So there are people who fall into that thing. But I think that's yeah, and now when it comes to, like, the youth, I think we as adults have a responsibility. When we see an Andrew Tate, and a lot of people did, both in the self-help world and anyone who had teenagers tried to step up and say, "Well, this guy's not okay,"
Yeah.
you know? Because this whole idea of this masculine figure, they come with these half-truths,
Mm.
and those half-truths are really hard to argue with.
If you have your father that you're currently rebelling towards being the one that says that this character is probably not great, like that creates even
Yeah.
more magnetism towards that character.
Yeah, like, I remember, so, my kids were right at the wrong age for Andrew Tate, so
Mm,
we
mm,
really deal with it. It was like, COVID,
yeah,
he's online, they're
mm,
online, and they were, like, 14 or whatever, right? So it
mm,
was, like, perfect,
yeah,
for him. And so it was a real struggle to get them off that, and I remember one time, he was, like, talking, he's like, "Why do I have to go to school?"
mm,
And I'm like, "Yep, yeah, you do, because you wanna learn and all kinds of stuff, all the normal things, right?"
yeah,
And he's like, "But these teachers are unsuccessful, not that smart. I can learn more online," And I'm like, "And they don't drive a Bugatti or a
yeah,
Ferrari,"
yeah,
And I say Andrew Tate all day, and he's got his university. I could learn from him.
yeah,
In 2 years, I'll be driving a Ferrari,
yeah,
and I look like muscly, and I kickbox and all this kinda stuff. And you're like, yeah, I personally think like a lot of times, talking to like let's say teachers and stuff based here in Stockholm, like I can listen to the greatest minds in the world. I can listen to these podcasters who are like Huberman, who's like actually a scientist. I don't have to listen
mm,
to some just guy talking or whatever,
yeah,
right? It's really, really hard to navigate and to find someone to follow. I think ultimately, the wisdom is there, and people are revisiting, in essence, connecting with it and trying to communicate it for other people to latch onto, to learn from, and to grow
Yeah.
from.
I think that's probably a universal thing around these very magnetic but still slightly maniac people, that there are some truths in there as well.
Of
So, like,
course.
for example, going to the gym, like, it's universally probably a great idea for anybody.
Yeah.
Learning more is not bad as such. Like, so part of it is true, and that also makes it a little bit tricky. I remember again, coming back to my wife, I take a lot of inspiration from her. We were at a trip this summer, and she's very particular in the kind of hotels that she want to be in and so forth. And one of the hotels clearly didn't meet her expectations of what she wanted,
Mhm.
and she got kind of locked into that. She couldn't appreciate anything, like even the perfect weather wasn't good, because she was kind of locked into this was not the experience that she was looking for. And then one of her friends helped her to kind of see that, yeah, but you can separate out. You're allowed to actually enjoy the breakfast that's good, even though you don't like the room and the lobby. So it
Mm,
doesn't have to be like either or. And we have a tendency to become very like binary in our thinking when it's
mm.
like a lot on the line or there's high emotion or whatever. And I think probably the same is true for like Andrew Tate, that they're like, you're allowed to say that some of the things are good, even though on like the aggregate, it can still be bad. Like both things can be true at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So Andrew Tate's a good example of like, please don't listen to him. And at the same time, there are other people who we probably, and we could, although we could say, for instance, like, take responsibility for your crap, right?
Mm,
All right. Yeah. You're 100% right about that.
mm,
Like, good, but like the message and the image is different than, and not something that we want to accept really. But then there are other people who are saying good things, but then they're doing bad stuff, right?
yeah, yeah.
I don't like to make excuses for
Mm,
people. I think
mm,
if someone's like a crappy, shitty person, I don't care what they say. They're just
yeah,
repeating what they've heard anyway,
yeah.
you know. You know.
How's your boy's relationship to Andrew Tate now?
Now they're free. They're free from Andrew Tate, which is good. Yeah,
Out of the
um,
sect.
yeah, but it took a while, And
Yeah.
then one of my older one, he left that stuff, and then he started getting like wrapped into the church thing and
Mm.
all kinds of things.
There's something with like searchers that can become quite similar to an addictive personality. You're looking for the next thing. I wouldn't be surprised if he has a period in his life where he's like all into sourdough bread, or all into training or whatever it is. Like you go all in, and I think there's something beautiful to that type of mindset. But you're so much more. You have probably to have some type of guardrails around you, like people that look out for, like, yeah, this has now gone to an extent where it's probably not good for you anymore. Like it's an obsessive personality type almost.
Definitely, I've got that too. So, and it's funny that you mentioned sourdough because he and I both got on the sourdough thing like last year.
Such a random
Like,
thing.
so I had a sourdough thing for like months, and he was
Yeah.
the one that got me started. He's like, "You got to do the sourdough." So we were doing the sourdough thing like sort of together, and we both stopped that now. But you're 100% right. So always looking for that thing.
Yeah. Uh, Can I ask you, maybe not super connected to the conversation that we just had, but one of the things that I've struggled the most with, I think, in my own practice has been um, getting locked out of the subjective experience because I put so much pressure on the subjective experience, if that makes
Mm,
sense. So like, I want to perform being present in my meditations. And
mm,
you, at least I can get quite good at looking a lot on kind of the surface level symptoms of being present, and
mm.
completely forget the real subjective experience. How would you kind of guide someone like me through that?
I think when it comes to, let's say, if it's specifically meditation, we could keep our meditation score, how many days in a row. If you use like Muse or something, they have like levels, right? That you get feedback.
Mm.
I've done all these things. So,
It's less about the gamification, because I actually don't use some type of tracking app for it. It's more like I want to get to that state of being present, and like I have this visualization around like when I'm the most grounded, I'm like the oak, and the oak doesn't need to tell anybody that it's an oak because it's so obviously an oak. And I've had those kind of states where I've been for real, and I know how they feel, so I can kind of fake myself into that feeling and start masquerading,
Mhm.
or performance acting those behaviors rather than the feeling, and then that just ends up spiraling to downwards. But it's a
Mm.
pattern that I've noticed on my own practice a lot.
When we meditate, often we end up falling into routines just like
Yeah.
anything else. We fall into these kind of thought routines or patterns. And it can be interesting to, to switch it up if we feel like we're just entering into the same thing.
Mm,
So, one of the good things about, let's say, a mantra, as opposed to something that we identify ourselves with,
mm,
is that the word itself can almost be meaningless, but it gives our mind something to hold on to.
mhm,
It's good if it's maybe a message that we kind of like, but it doesn't have it's good if it's just, like, not as, meaningful as, let's say, I am an oak, and I'm
mm,
gonna, like, spread my stuff out,
mm.
and, because what happens is then we're forcing a thought into a state where we ultimately want to be free from thought.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's nail on the head, yeah.
Another practice, which might be just something simple like the breath, as
Mm,
opposed to like a visualization,
mm,
um, you know, to because it's just being in that state is the key. We also have an expectation a lot of times with meditation is that it's gonna do something, but
absolutely,
actually
yeah,
nothing. The whole
yeah,
whole thing is that it's this big, we said in the beginning, this vast openness,
mm,
expansion, consciousness that we are ultimately, in our deepest core behind the thought and the emotion.
yeah,
We don't have to get stuck in the emotional body either. We can go
mm,
deeper and deeper to this place where it's vast and open. And the way there is through, right? So maybe we start in this kind of clutter mind.
mm,
Oh, I got to do. I got too much to do, and then we get into the mind. Oh, I'm going to make a nice plan, right? The planning
mm,
kind of structured mind. Then we get into this kind of state where we start to think, oh, uh, you know, like, I love my kids, I'm grateful for my life, right? And then all of a sudden, that might lead us into this feeling state.
mm,
Maybe it's a feeling of nostalgia, of uh, longing for openness, clarity, and we just keep going. We let ourselves be, let that be too. Don't get stuck on that. There's no need to. And then eventually we fall asleep.
mm, yeah,
But eventually, maybe at one point it all just goes away. And then you're
yeah,
like, and then it comes back, right?
yeah.
So that process is the thing, and we don't have to have expectations of doing anything because the results will come in a
Mm.
different way. It's not like we're doing this to get something. We're doing this to leave stuff.
It's difficult with these things that have a tendency to compound over multiple years.
Mm,
Like it's very difficult at times to kind of stay motivated when you're kind of off the wagon, if that makes
mm,
sense, and get
mm.
back on it. Final question, like the story of Shamir and or Shams and Rumi. Did you identify more with any of those two characters?
I'm probably more of a Shams than than a Rumi. I've never had, like, for any period of time, a long, uh, position, a stately position in
Mm,
that sense. I've always been more, "Let's try that, let's do this," so more impulsive.
yeah,
Even though maybe when people meet me, I maybe look or seem very structured or
yeah,
something,
yeah.
um, you know, um, but I'm very, let's say, chaotic
Mm.
and all that stuff too, mostly. So probably more of a Shams than a Rumi.
Is that something that you're like comfortable with, or like is there identity and perhaps an opinion about that?
Oh, that's a good question. I haven't thought about it like that. Um, yeah, maybe part of it is that I want, so a part of me wants to be, let's say, remembered for doing something great or anything, just
Mm,
like, many of us, right? We feel like we've contributed in some way. And in a way, In a strange sense, we don't know Shams without Rumi, right? He doesn't leave his stamp on a body of work in
Mm,
the way that Rumi did with like 5,000 poems or whatever.
mm,
And so in that sense, yeah, when you say that, I think, oh, it would be nice to be this person who's left these 5,000 poems, you
mm,
know? At the same time, I have to like let myself be and for this to play out the way it needs to play out. And
mm.
if I could be some Shams to some other Rumi, I'd be totally happy with that because I think I just want to offer whatever I can
Yeah.
um, in the work that I'm doing, right? So, yeah. And if someone feels ignited by this kind of stuff or wants that kind of like deep work or whatever,
Mm,
then let's go.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's your relationship to like the desire to have impact, for example? Because I remember this very viscerally from the shadow work that I did. That I realized while doing it how much either negative or positive emotion that I put on different things. Like to me, the desire to have impact, for example, would probably be something that I would perceive as kind of in the shadows of it, in the darkness. It was something like egotistical, something. But at least through my work, I start to realize that there are no like universal laws. It's more like you've been conditioned to think certain things, and there's a lot of light in what you perceive to be your darkness at times. I had
Mhm.
a beautiful conversation with Stephen D'Souza, who wrote a book on shadow work. He introduced me to the concept of the golden shadow, and I thought that was beautiful. So I think he had a really good definition of shadow. We have a tendency to put positive and negative on like these things, and he was more like, no, it's not necessarily good or bad. It's more like it's hidden in the darkness. You don't know about it. You're shaped. So he had a visualization that you're born into this world, in this beautiful castle with all of these rooms lit up, and then slowly over time, as you're conditioned by your parents and society, you start to lock the rooms down. And it can be small things that your father or your mother said that don't act a fool. We're at a party or whatever, and then you start closing down a room. So maybe I shouldn't take up space. Whereas in your core character, maybe you're an excellent public speaker if you would just allow that kind of extroverted. And he said that oftentimes, like your greatest gifts to give, you've kind of hid in the shadow. You're a little bit ashamed of it. And for high performers specifically, he mentioned that one of the biggest shadows was you're kind of afraid of your potential. You're limiting yourself
Mm.
because you don't want to like take up too much space because you've been told that that's a bad thing to do. What's your kind of reflections on that?
It's beautiful that you say that because I think, yeah, for me, that's 100% one of those things that I've struggled with, right?
Mm,
I want to be a good person, and in my mind, somehow or somewhere deeper, like you say, in
mm,
the shadow side, I associate success with being, let's say, rich, and then that richness is like your jerks,
yeah,
like Trump,
yeah,
right? And so then I'm like, yeah, that's something I definitely uh, was forced to learn through
mm,
my poor parents and all this kind of stuff, and it
mm,
still hangs there.
mm,
And I see that in myself, and I totally have done that, and I feel like in many ways, there's another book called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, and he talks about living a shadow life.
okay.
Uh,
And what is that?
yeah, the shadow life is that basically you live something very adjacent to the life you wanna live. So, for
Yeah,
instance, for me, being, let's say, a writer and a creator, I've worked, like, in the TV business as a creative director, servicing, television companies and
mm,
and, and regular companies with creativity
mm,
instead of writing my own book.
yeah.
And
Instead of being the creative, yeah, yeah,
yeah, I've been living a shadow career, like a
mm,
parallel thing, which gives you this good but not great.
yeah,
And
exactly.
and it's a fear of this, success, of standing out, of thinking like you're so egotistical and all this
Yeah,
kind of and we have to somehow let that go.
mm,
But it is hard, because we do hear those voices, especially with the people we're supposed to, like, care about the most. That's
yeah,
the strange thing.
absolutely. Yeah.
Whereas other people might just jump on, and be like, "This book is so important to me," and you're like, "Oh, you're welcome," like,
Yeah.
whereas someone in your family, like, you think you're so great, you're doing the
Mm.
talks about that and all this kind of stuff, like, I'm just trying to offer what I can,
Yeah.
and it's taken me until now, which is like feels like forever to finally say, "No, I'm doing the thing that I need to do," right? And that's like, yeah, huge shift.
Liberating, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, there's something around, at least again, just my subjective experience, but just giving yourself permission to want the things that you want.
yeah,
That for me was probably the hardest one. Just saying, you know what? If this is what you want, own up to it. Like, it's okay to want the things that you want. Like,
yeah,
we're so conditioned into a version of what you should want. So it takes a lot of time just to understand, what do I actually want, and then giving yourself the permission to actually want those things and own up to
yeah.
it. For yourself, you don't have to push that down anybody else's throat, but at least be honest towards
Ex
yourself.
exactly, yeah. And
Yeah.
once you step into that, then things also fall into place too because
Mm.
you're aligned. You're more
Yeah.
aligned.
Yeah.
If I hadn't said, "I'm gonna write this book, I don't care," right?
Mm.
I wouldn't be talking to you.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have
Yeah.
had, like, a Holostyle saying, "Oh, we have to, like,
Yeah.
show this to people," whatever. So it's
Mm.
just about that. It's about stepping towards the thing that you wanna do with
Mm.
whatever it takes and
Mm.
and being aligned, and if we do, amazing, great things can happen.
What would you name this chapter for yourself? Like the chapter that you're in the book of Gary's life. What is this chapter about?
Sharing.
Sharing.
Yeah.
I love
Sharing.
it.
Yeah, sharing, like, when you asked about, "Oh, what light can you shed or what things can you, offer?" And it's just like, for me, it's just like, maybe through time and effort or whatever, I've accumulated all kinds of, different stuff,
Mm.
and it's like letting that be, and not feeling like I have to hold it back or,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think it's about that for me
Oh,
right
that's
now.
beautiful. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
beautiful.
how about you? Where are you?
Betting on myself
Mm,
is a huge thing.
mm,
And it's been kind of building over the last 2 or 3 years. And there's a lot of freedom, but also newfound sense of responsibility around that one. Like there's
mm,
nobody to blame, and that's scary at times.
mm,
I don't know how I would capture it like clearly. It feels like a luxury to be able to look at your life and say we have the possibility now to do absolutely anything we want.
mm.
Like there are no rules
Mm,
to how we want to structure life, and it
mm,
feels at times a little bit like a cheat code. Like all of these things, like the emperor's new clothes of society's rules. Like these aren't rules in that sense. It's more rules that I've been conditioned to believe in. But there are plenty of people living way differently, and it seems that they're not in jail. So
yeah.
moving towards more sun, more presence, more calmness in the family. That's a big part of what this chapter is about. But
Mm,
yeah, giving permission is probably the like what enables all of this.
mm,
But I'm still in building mode. Like I'm not in like I'm set or anything like that. I'm super
going for it.
engaged in building, like, and I'm really excited about it, and that's like super fun as well. Having like I feel a lot of clarity on purpose for the
Mm.
first time in a couple of years, and that feels awesome.
It's so good when you feel like you're taking steps towards the thing that
Yeah,
really or one of the things that really are important to you and that you're driving for that. Yeah.
yeah. It's an
Yeah.
interesting shift. So me and Hannah, we've had a super intensive year. We've like sold 2 properties and moved out of them and switched to everything. So like there's been so much on the like operational side that has felt like problems and issues. But since a year ago, roughly, when we decided like this is what we want to do,
Mm,
we've been so aligned on purpose and mission. And I've always almost had the opposite. Like my day to day is like super structured and feels
mm,
ordered and good, in
mm,
words that we've used before. But I've felt more confused on purpose.
Right.
So it was interesting. I kind of lived a completely different life where there was no order, but purpose was clear. And
Mm.
hopefully I'm moving in now towards like, okay, purpose and order are kind of aligning. That's at least the ambition. We'll see.
Yeah. I think you're doing it.
Yeah, it feels like it. It's funny. We said that we should move down here try it out for 6 months. And I think after 2 weeks, we looked at each other and like, yeah, we live here now.
Yeah. So good.
Yeah, it feels great so far. We'll see. Where can you find the book, Gary? This has been great. But for those who are interested to pick it up.
Easiest on Amazon, just, go to Amazon. Of course, you can get it on my website too. And the audiobook will be coming out shortly as well. So there'll be an audible version.
Awesome. Looking forward to it. It's beautifully written. I really enjoyed not just the content, but the style of it as well. So
Oh, thanks.
kudos for that being your first attempt at a grown-up book. I know you have plenty of kids' book already released for that. It was beautiful.
Thank you so much.
It's always fun catching up with you, Gary. I'm looking forward to I'm coming to Stockholm here soon. I'll hopefully be able to visit one of your breathwork classes as well.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, come any Sunday as my guest, of course.
Yeah. All right. There. Cheers, Gary.
Yep. See you later.
And there, we're at the end of the episode. I think it's so amazing that almost 70% of you actually listen to the end of the episodes, especially for long format. I'm so thankful for that. Like the engagement numbers is fantastic. Before we leave each other, 2 things. First off, this episode was sponsored by Grail, and I'll make no secret about Grail is the company that I'm starting. So it's the future of AI, and how can we unlock value that's not just automation, but actually building towards a future that we want to live in, like a future where I want to work, augmentation. So head over to grail.works to know more. Secondly, I'd appreciate so much that you listen to this podcast. But even though 70% listen to the end, almost 70% are not subscribed either. So if you can give a like button, subscribe to all my channels. We're on LinkedIn, we're on Instagram, we're on TikTok apparently. We have an awesome webpage. And there's so much more content, like yes, the reels and so forth. But what I really would like to push for is that every week I publish a long format article, which is the pinnacle of my thinking. So it's the most interesting thing that I come across that week, either in podcasts or in other endeavors. And I try to write about it towards you, a senior leader. Like, what is the crucial takeaway from the most important part of my week, let's say. I publish that on LinkedIn and on my webpage, thinkroompodcast.com. Thank you so much, and see you next time.